So Aryan was a seasoned fire lookout who'd seen it all, but even he felt a chill down his spine in that old eagle nest tower. It was literally just a glass box perched 90 feet in the air on these spindly steel legs. Total isolation. Aryan had signed up for a 6-month solo stint to decompress, thinking the only thing he'd have to worry about was spotting smoke in the tree line. For the first month, Aryan actually vibed with the silence. His only link to the outside world was this ancient long-range radio. But one night, while Aryan was checking in with base, things got weird. Aryan said copy that, and 10 seconds later his own voice played back to him through the speaker. Copy that. It wasn't just a normal echo, though. Aryan noticed the pitch was slightly off, like someone was wearing his voice like a costume and still trying to get the fit right. Aryan brushed it off as a glitch and hit the sack. Then came the storm. Aryan was watching the lightning rip across the sky when he saw it, a bright red flare popping off in the dead zone, a valley that had been totally cut off for years because of massive rock slides. Aryan grabbed his binoculars, but the rain was too thick. He knew nobody should be out there. The next morning, Aryan found a Polaroid photo slid under the door. His heart absolutely dropped. The tower was 90 feet up, and Aryan had locked the trap door from the inside. He picked up the photo with shaking hands. It was a shot of Aryan himself, fast asleep in his bed, taken from inside the room. No footprints, no mud, and the lock was still turned. Aryan scrambled for the radio to call for help, but as soon as he keyed the mic, that echo started up again. This time it wasn't just repeating him. Between the mimics of Aryan's voice, he heard a low, raspy wheeze, a laugh. Aryan didn't wait. He started packing his gear, desperate to get out. But when Aryan went to shove his feet into his hiking boots, he realized something was wrong. They looked exactly like his boots, but when Aryan tried to lace them up, they were 2 sizes too small. Someone had swapped his gear for a perfect, tiny replica while he slept. Aryan didn't even care at that point. He booked it down the ladder barefoot and sprinted through the woods. After hours of running, Aryan finally hit the ranger station and found Vikram, the head ranger. Aryan was a total mess, rambling about the photo and the boots. Vikram looked concerned and took a team back up to the tower with Aryan to check it out. When Vikram and Aryan got there, the place was spotless. The photo was gone. The radio worked perfectly. Vikram gave Aryan that "you've been alone too long" look, suggesting it was just a mental breakdown. Aryan knew better, but he couldn't prove it. He quit on the spot and moved back to the city. A few weeks later, Aryan was chilling in his apartment, trying to forget the whole thing. Suddenly, his smart TV started acting up, flickering with static. Then Aryan heard it, that same distorted version of his own voice coming through the speakers. The voice whispered, "Hey, Aryan, the boots fit now." Aryan looked down at the floor. Sitting right next to his bed were those tiny, identical hiking boots he'd left miles away in the mountains. The tower was empty, but whatever was in there had followed Aryan home. Kaito was a structural engineer who had spent years studying how salt water eats away at concrete. Because of his research, Kaito received a rare high-level permit to visit Hashima Island, a place everyone calls Battleship Island. It's this decaying, abandoned coal mining rock off the coast of Japan, packed with crumbling apartment blocks that look like a war zone. Kaito was joined by a local guide named Tishi, a man who rarely spoke and never looked Kaito in the eye. The moment Kaito stepped off the boat, the air felt heavy. Tishi led Kaito past the safe tourist paths and deep into the forbidden Zone 4, where the buildings were literally held together by rusted rebar and luck. Kaito began his inspection, running his hands along the walls of an old primary school. In one specific classroom, Kaito noticed something that made his skin crawl. The dust on the floor wasn't settled. There were fresh drag marks, as if something heavy had been pulled across the room recently. Kaito turned to Tishi and asked, "Has anyone else been here today?" Tishi just stared at a patch of moss on the wall and muttered, "Only the wind, Kaito." But then Kaito pressed his palm against a concrete pillar in the center of the room. The building had no power, no sunlight was hitting this spot, and the island was freezing, but the pillar was warm. It felt like it had a pulse. Kaito pulled his hand back, staring at Tishi, but Tishi had already turned his back and started walking toward the basement stairs. Kaito followed Tishi into the darkness of the lower levels. The smell changed from salt and rot to something metallic, like old pennies. Kaito clicked on his industrial flashlight and swept the beam across a row of old lockers. He found a small pile of fresh blue plastic water bottles and a clean, dry wool blanket tucked into a corner. These weren't artifacts from the 1970s. These were brand new. Kaito called out to Tishi, "Someone is living down here, Tishi. We need to report this." Tishi didn't answer. Kaito spun around, but the guide was gone. The only sound was the dripping of seawater somewhere deep in the gut of the island. Kaito began to panic. He tried to head back the way they came, but when Kaito reached the stairwell, a massive slab of concrete had fallen, completely blocking the exit. It hadn't been there 5 minutes ago. Kaito realized with a jolt of terror that he was being herded. Suddenly, Kaito heard a sound from the floor above, the unmistakable rhythm of multiple people walking. Not one person, but a crowd, all stepping in perfect synchronization. Thump, thump, thump. Kaito turned his flashlight toward the ceiling and saw the dust falling through the cracks. Then a voice whispered from the darkness behind him. It sounded like Tishi, but the voice was coming from a ventilation duct too small for a man. The voice said, "The concrete needs to stay warm, Kaito." Kaito bolted. He found a service ladder and climbed like his life depended on it, his heart hammering against his ribs. He burst out onto a rooftop and saw Tishi standing by the boat dock, hundreds of yards away, calmly smoking a cigarette. Kaito screamed for him, but Tishi didn't even look up. Kaito scrambled down a rusted fire escape, leaping the last 10 feet into the overgrown weeds. He sprinted toward the dock, feeling eyes watching him from every dark window of the abandoned apartments. When Kaito finally reached the boat, he grabbed Tishi by the shoulders and demanded to know why he had left him. Tishi just blew out a cloud of smoke and said, "You finished your research early, Kaito. That is good." He acted as if nothing had happened. Kaito looked back at the island as they sailed away and saw a group of figures standing on the rooftop he had just escaped from. They were all wearing the same bright orange safety vests as Kaito. When Kaito got back to the mainland, he tried to contact Dr. Yamamoto, the professor who had arranged the trip. The university told Kaito that no one named Dr. Yamamoto had ever worked there. Kaito checked his bag for the concrete samples he had taken, but instead of rocks, his sample bags were filled with human teeth. Kaito never told anyone else. He moved to a landlocked city miles away from the ocean, but every time he touches a concrete wall, he waits for it to feel warm. Jansen, Jesse, and Leo were standing on the dark, oily shoreline of the East River, staring at the silhouette of North Brother Island. Leo was a college senior working on a thesis about abandoned institutional architecture, and he had convinced his two best friends to help him pull off this illegal midnight mission. Jansen was the one who had sourced the 3 beat-up kayaks, while Jesse was the one holding the waterproof map, though his hands were shaking slightly in the moonlight. The trio paddled silently, the sound of the city fading behind them until the only noise was the rhythmic splashing of Leo's oars. When they finally hit the muddy banks of the island, Jansen dragged his kayak into the thick brush first, followed by Jesse and Leo. The island was a graveyard of history, once a quarantine hospital for smallpox and later a rehab center. Now it was just a mess of vines and crumbling brick. Leo clicked on his high-powered flashlight, the beam cutting through the fog to reveal the skeletal remains of the Riverside Hospital. "We stay together," Jesse whispered, clutching his backpack straps. Jansen nodded, though he was already wandering toward the rusted iron gates of the main ward. Leo was busy snapping photos of the decay, noting how the ivy had swallowed the windows of the old laboratories. The air smelled like wet earth and something sour like old medicine. As they entered the main lobby of the quarantine building, Leo noticed that the floor was littered with rusted gurneys and shattered glass. Jansen pointed his light down a long, dark hallway and saw a row of heavy wooden doors. Suddenly, Jesse stopped in his tracks. "Did you guys hear that?" Jesse asked, his voice cracking. Leo and Jansen went dead silent. From somewhere deep in the basement, there was a faint, metallic scraping sound, like a bed being dragged across a concrete floor. Jansen, trying to act brave, stepped forward. "It's just the wind in the pipes, Jesse," he said, but Leo noticed there was no wind tonight. To make things worse, they reached a junction where the hallway split into 3 directions. Jansen suggested they split up for 5 minutes to cover more ground for Leo's research. Jansen would take the morgue, Jesse would check the cafeteria, and Leo would stay in the central ward. Leo hesitated, but eventually agreed, setting his watch. 5 minutes passed. Leo was alone in the ward when he heard Jesse's voice calling from the end of the hall. "Hey Leo, come look at this. I found something." Leo turned his light toward the sound. It was definitely Jesse's voice, the same pitch, the same nasal tone. Leo started walking toward the voice, but then his radio crackled. It was the real Jesse, sounding terrified on the walkie-talkie. "Leo? Jansen? Where are you guys? I'm back at the entrance. I got scared and turned around." Leo froze. If Jesse was at the entrance, who was calling him from the dark room at the end of the hall? Leo slowly panned his flashlight into the room where the voice had come from. The beam hit a figure standing in the corner, facing the wall. It was tall, wearing a tattered hospital gown, its skin the color of wet ash. It wasn't Jesse. It wasn't Jansen. The figure didn't move, but it began to speak again, using Jesse's exact voice. "I found something, Leo. Come closer." Leo didn't scream. He couldn't. He turned and sprinted back toward the lobby, his boots thudding against the rotting floorboards. He slammed into Jansen, who was running from the opposite direction. Jansen's face was pale, his flashlight gone. "Leo, we have to go now," Jesse gasped.
I saw a woman in the morgue. She was sitting on a table, and she didn't have a face." The two of them found Jesse at the entrance, and the three friends scrambled toward the shore. But the kayaks were gone. Leo shone his light onto the water and saw their 3 kayaks drifting 50 yards out into the river as if someone had calmly untied them and pushed them away. From the darkness of the trees behind them, a low, guttural moaning sound began, the sound of an older woman in intense physical pain. "Swim," Leo commanded. Jansen, Jesse, and Leo plunged into the freezing, polluted water of the East River, kicking desperately toward the lights of the Bronx. As Leo looked back one last time, he saw 3 figures standing on the shoreline where they had just been. One looked like Jansen, one looked like Jesse, and one looked exactly like Leo. The 3 figures waved at them in perfect, synchronized motion. They reached the other side exhausted and shivering. Jansen burned his clothes the next day. Leo tried to develop the photos he took on the island, but every single frame came out as a solid, oily black, except for the very last one. In that photo, Leo was standing in the ward, and behind him, a tall figure in a hospital gown was leaning in, its mouth open right next to Leo's ear, as if whispering a secret. Leo never finished his thesis. To this day, Leo refuses to answer the phone if the caller ID shows an unknown number, because he's afraid he'll hear his own voice on the other end, telling him to come back to the island.